Hello everyone, I'm Drifting, and today I'm going to be talking about a complex web novel I recently read called I'm Not a Literary Giant. The Chinese title is 我不是文豪, 我 just meaning I, 不是 meaning not, 文 having to do with literature or writing, usually of Chinese sort, and then hao usually means the literal translation given machine translation is giant, but looking at the Google translation tends to mean something along the lines of heroic, legend, hero, or master. Right, so I'm not a literary hero. I'm not a literary master, legend. Those could all work, but I really like the translation. I'm not a literary giant. The author is Ye Liang, so he's written a couple works before, but this is probably his passion project. As I said before, it's a very complex web novel in terms of themes, in terms of literature, and we'll get into that as we discuss the summary. Has over 200 chapters at the moment. Title is very unique. Has the book name, the main character Wang Zixu, so drawing of him, big forehead, covering a mask. The Nobel Prize in Literature 2083 for his dream and never give up. He totally worth it. A good literati. So Chinese author, but writing in English. So let's discuss the summary. So there's no plagiarism, so there's no copywriting. He's not going to be a porter transplanting works from Earth to another world. So there's no transmigration, no rebirth, right? No time travel. So there's not a do-over web novel, as a lot of entertainment web novels tend to do, going on to a path of wealth accumulation. So it's not like Director of the Music Department or Disaster Artist, but it's along those lines of that urban life, slice of life sort of story. There's no systems and no cheat codes. So this is a very down-to-earth web novel involving plots like The Great Storyteller, which was a do-over web novel, The Novelist Who Left Through Time, another do-over web novel. A lot of entertainment series and wealth creation tends to go that route. This is a pure writers section. We see this with like quarter music, hidden quarter music genius or whatnot, or like various literature web novels like Bakuman. This is deeply involved in literature or specific subfields such as sports with Go and ping pong. So yeah, here's the summary. Many years later, when Wang Zixu stood on the stage for the Nobel Prize for Literature, he would think of the distant afternoon when his wife cut her hand. At that time, he was still working as a clerk in a public institution in a small city, with little money and unable to enter the literary sphere or the literary world. Today, he's become the leader of the literary world in the Three Rivers, Four Lakes, and Five Mountains. Everyone knows his name, and he's a national treasure level writer of the highest rank, right? Another reference to Chinese literature circles. He has walked countless paths and paid countless prices. When he stood in front of the podium, he said, I'm not a literary giant, I just want to make some money. So again, alluding to a lot of those wealth creations, such as Losing Money Be Tycoon, What is This Game, right? And various video game, comedy, funny web novels. Romanticism is the most magnificent highlight that mankind can achieve. Humanitarianism is the gentle bottom line of mankind in the most bleak and unspeakable times. This story is about romanticism and humanism. So as I said before, this is a very deep web novel. It goes into very complex plots. Having a little bit of knowledge of some literature to draw upon would help. It loves to talk about various works and focuses on specific authors, which I will get to as we discuss the plot. So I'm not a literary giant. Our main character, Wang Zixu, is this sort of civil administrator working for the government. I don't think they specify as a department, it's agriculture or propaganda or writing, but he has a very cushy desk job. He's very behind the scenes. He is sort of a marginalized figure. He's a middle-aged 30-year-old. I always imagined him wearing glasses and being bookish, but the drawing on the cover is very different from what I imagined. He's married, which is very unique as a protagonist, right? Because a lot of people like to do various romantic interests, but there's a lot of interesting romantic entanglements as the story goes on, and I'll let you read that on your own. So in the first couple chapters, our main character Wang Zixu is kind of like this very repressed and kind of depressed writer, very rich in a world. He's an introvert, um, and as most writers are, he's tend to be known as a creative genius or creative madness, sense of self, sense of ego, um, one of those guys who may think they're self-important but not necessarily have the ability or the fame to back it up. But he is a little bit of a dreamer, a little bit self-conscious, strong sense of self and ego, also a strong sense of self-loathing. And it's very interesting the way this web novel depicts writers, right? Because between the medium of traditional web novel to a traditional novel to web novel, this lies in between. I would say this tends more toward a serious web novel, similar to science fiction, whereas a lot of web novels tend toward more of the entertainment aspect. Web novel used to be called 歪歪小说. Another nickname would be digital emotional gratification, aka digital masturbation, just because it was much more about power fantasy, power leveling, various wuxia characters with face slapping and cool plots. Our main character is very much a much more meek, self-contained but still spontaneously angry youth, even though he's supposedly middle-aged. It's a very passionate urban life, slice of life web novel um, that's has a very unique style to it. So our author, Ye Liang, his very first chapter discusses how he wants to start off his book, and he describes it as taking a brick and trying to knock you unconscious. And he's going to take you on this unique journey that he is kind of prepared for you, right? As I said before, this is really a passion project, and slice of life and urban life is always one of my favorite genres. So our main character starts off similar to some of the characters you would see in the movie Office Spaces are falling down, just your average salaryman working in a cubicle among colleagues. He's been passed over for a promotion twice. He's kind of suppressed by his younger colleagues. He's unappreciated. He's kind of like the the office punching bag, right? He works in the government, so he's not like a public servant. He's like a civil administrator. But he's considered a senior figure. He's been in this position for quite a while. But he has dreams of being a grand writer. And so one of the leitmotifs or motifs at the beginning is when he sells his morals, so to speak, becoming a script writer. The job position is called speech therapist or a psychologist for this app company called 文爱. Wen meaning literature, and then I just meaning love or warm love. So literary uh, love, right? So it's a digital art form, very reminiscent of various phone hotlines, trying to entice emotional gratification of a more erotic or emotional romantic partner or romantic arousal. Um, a lot of innuendos of like a sexual nature. And so the first theme we come across is that everything is about power except for sex. That's a quote by Oscar Wilde. So, evoking some of these great writer allusions such as, Whitman, Thoreau, Emerson. So that brand, Oscar Wilde's a very interesting character and writer as well. Dorian Gray him? I think so. I think the picture of Dorian Gray is by Oscar Wilde. But Oscar Wilde is one of these interesting romantic creators. They'll talk about Junichiro Watanabe in terms of writing a crass and romantic style and uncovering the source of love. And it approaches love from an interesting direction, right? In psychology, love is an emotional response from an emotional arousal coupled with action, right? Whether it's a strong emotion or fear or excitement that can cause cortisol and endorphins to flow, invoking love. Others think of it as an economic transaction between two parties where you are merging your assets together, putting things on a scale. I think, what is it? Rebirth is like those flowing years, discusses like how love and partnership, especially in a marriage, is where you have two people taking all their assets, their emotional states, their family backgrounds, their future potential, putting it on a scale, and trying to maintain that balance and maintaining that relationship. So marriage is a long-term commitment, as you would in your wedding vows. And this one is talking much more about a more vulgar sort of love, very temporary, very ethereal, very sort of young, a young sort of love, right? The heat of passion, right? So he is a speech therapist trying to fulfill customers' emotional libido, right? Trying to prepare them for the next day, as one would a viewer of VTubers, right? As a cultural connoisseur, whether you are a cinephile watching movies, Nerdwriter had a very interesting video. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it's Nerdwriter, but it could be Jacob Geller, where they discusses the lens of David Fincher, right? Maybe it could be every frame of painting or whatnot. But it's like David Fincher's camera. It was a nice video essay on the voyeurism of watching a movie, right? David Fincher's lens has a very interesting shooting director style and profile of camera shots, right? And through that lens, right? What is it? In the Window is another famous camera um, classical movie, right? Alongside 12 Angry Men, which depicts the viewer as a voyeur, right? A kind of there's kind of pervertedness in watching someone else's story. A lot of more recent Korean web novel trends back in 2019 discussed that with the idea of constellations being, readers and omniscient readers' viewpoint, and these main characters trying to fulfill their own lives outside of the story. I believe Inkheart had something similar or akin to that sort of style. But that's a very interesting theme, right? The idea of everything is about power except for sex. I think it was another entertainment web novel, which is like the only way to age gracefully is power and money, right? That's like how do you maintain, you know, a sense of status when beauty fades away. It was in terms of how what would allow a woman to age gracefully, and that was an interesting response that I've never come across before. The other motif is this idea of the Nobel Prize. Our main character has this idea in his head, this grand ambition. This is his dream. It's stated very early on that he wants to win a Nobel Prize. Every single one of his actions, whether it's through reading, whether it's through writing, his ultimate pursuit is to win a Nobel Prize. But along the way, there are many obstacles before we get there, right? We kind of already see the end in sight, like a Bobby Broccoli video. So he quotes he has 50 chances to win a Nobel Prize, and as each passing year, that chances get lower and lower. So where does this number 50 come from? Well, he's 30 years old. The average life expectancy is 80 years old, and the reason why he says 50 chances is because you cannot be awarded a Nobel Prize if you are dead. There are no post posthumous awards, right? So you have to be alive. And it's very interesting because through that lens, he goes through the lists of various Nobel laureates, writers who've won the Nobel Prize, and the various people who did it, right? And how it is not a shame that they didn't win the Nobel Prize, but it is a shame for the Nobel Prize that they weren't awarded. And it's very grand how they discuss all these very famous writers. The very traditional writers you would want to know or have a background in would be, Rilke. Letters from Rilke is very famous. Tagatha is very popular in Chinese culture. The Indian poet. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing his name wrong. So traditional poets such as Keats, I don't think make it, but famous characters such as Hemingway, existentialists, Nietzsche's. Oh, I think Nietzsche appears as this aberrational spirit. And I'll get more into that in a little bit as we discuss various writers. But yeah, so they go on about Dostoevsky and various Nobel Prize winners. So his grand ambition is to win a Nobel Prize, and he pursues that through his writing career, which at this moment, at the beginning of the story, is not going anywhere. And this will continue to change as the story goes along. He has a lot of submissions to famous magazines such as the Get 获得. This is in the modern age, by the way, as you can tell from the APP. And the other famous one is 9月 or September. So these are the two famous literary magazines where you would publish literary works, as Dostoevsky did in his local newspaper, as like Pravda or whatever, which is Truth. But this is a digital age, right? So he's a speech therapist. He is, doing the role that AI does with chatbots, but in a more human way, right, with scripts. And it turns out he's a very good writer. He's drawing upon his knowledge of being a writer. They say he's a Mao De literature award style writer. He's of that level, right? Um, he's a very high quality writer, but none of his submissions have made it. And then it will slowly uncover how the idea of power and writing must intertwine, right? The idea of status, of politics, of office politics, behind the scenes and relationships, all come to provide a background and build the credit of famous people, right? Throughout history, it's always not been just about your abilities, but also who you know and who you are, right? Who your parents, who your family members are, and that becomes a central point of conflict later on in the web novel. Various family and relationship factors lead him to success and obstacles in his journey, and even failure at times. So our main character, kind of this marginalized figure in the office. Let me see who's the director here. Um, Go Ju. His director Go Yingbiao. Is his is like the district or regional manager is superior. As I said before, he's been passed over for promotion. A lot of his younger colleagues are kind of against him. They are supporting this younger figure called Diao Yiwen. Right, so he's kind of like this parachute cadre, right? He's kind of dropped into the office for gilding, right, where he wants to build up his resume. So, working along the countryside before moving up for promotion. Uh, a lot to do with the family background. His father is Yan San, right? So, a professor, no, a deputy county magistrate of Changle County. So, pretty high-ranking official. His father is mentioned before as a down and out official who used to have a decently high position, but his political connections really didn't bring him anywhere. So our main character, Wang Zixu, is not necessarily Red Prince, but he's not necessarily like just a poor farmer. He does come from a minor official background, but that career didn't really go anywhere as the story explores. So uh, Diao Yiwen comes from a moderately respectable university, Hexi 大学, whereas our main character Wang Zixu comes from one of the top three colleges. I think what is it, 211, 987, Beida. So he's coming from the Beijing School of Technology. He studied engineering, right? As you know, I think Mao Zedong also studied, which was engineering. Most high-level politicians either study engineering, literature, or political science. And so with his engineering background, he's engaged in, cultural paperwork of sorts, as it's mentioned. But he has no strong background or no character relationships. He kind of keeps to himself. Whereas other people are engaging in relationships and drinking, talking about stocks, he's busy writing and he's not making a lot of money. He's submitted, but he's never published any manuscripts, nor has he written any short stories. So this new platform, APP platform, Wongai, is the first time he is actually making money. He's awarded a certain amount of money per 10,000 characters, 5,000 words, as web novel writers are. So this is his first moral dilemma. Um, the two characters of this company are very interesting. We have Zuo Ziliang, uh, Long? No, is wow, it is Zuo Ziliang. So he is this entrepreneur with a vision, kind of Steve Jobs figure character. He's kind of a leader, a visionary. There's this short story about a jazz bar, which is kind of ironic because I feel like it's not the first story I've come across with a jazz bar, or maybe I'm imagining things. But yeah, Zhuo Ziliang is very stubborn. He knows people very well, has a very strong literary background, very stubborn as well, right? He is dogged in his pursuit of his dream of this company. He's a strong vision, a commanding presence. He's a gambler, is willing to bet on people. He makes winning bets, kind of like Jeff Bezos or whatnot, or Bill Gates. Just a strong businessman and figure, trying to make it. And he has a partner, Ye Lang. Um, she's the more business-minded side, the economist. I don't really like the way the author Ye Liang did her character because I felt like she could have been a stronger female figure, more business incompetent, but the story tends to showcase her more incompetent and weaker side in the literature background. Kind of looks down on her a little bit on the literary appreciation, but you kind of need a foil, so she is that foil, which is an interesting romantic entanglement or point of interest. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but yeah, you're welcome to read that for yourself, but it's just an interesting figure. Not necessarily, as I said before, there's a lot about drama and relationships and there are more important figures that come along as well, right? We have Ning Chunyan. Ning Chunyan. She is the first high-level figure, a supporter and patron of the arts and of our main character. And then we meet his childhood friend. Childhood friends are always very unique, aren't they? Cheng Qingluo. Oh, 胡萝卜 who's known as this genius writer, a young genius. They were classmates in middle or high school, had a couple of childhood interactions for a couple months before they both moved on. into different career and life paths, and she's now a famous writer with her own struggles. But the story revolves around our main character, this little known writer called Wang Zixu. Why is this character so important to the story? Well, as a famous scriptwriter, he gains a reputation. His username is um, a little prince pulling up the baobab tree. And the little prince becomes a very important symbol throughout the story. Our main character, as a genius writer or indulging in his creative madness, sees apparitions. It's mentioned that he's not schizophrenic, but which becomes questionable later on. In chapter 199 is a watershed, shedding light into an interesting background. Um, but there are many allusions leading up to chapter 199 and other allusions. I think the recent one, 225, was a small revelation of certain other characters. But yeah, our main character, Little Prince Pulling Up the Baobab Tree, is known as a very naive but artistic literary username. Now, why is The Little Prince so interesting? Well, it's written by Anton Saint Exupery, very famous childhood book, alongside what Don Quixote is another very famous one. But it's a childhood book showcasing his naive inner child side, right? He's a very stubborn writer. He solves his problems through brute force and effort rather than through knowledge. So he's shown as to be the stubborn, creative thing that's not very business minded, but still has to worry about finances. He is not wealthy. He is not necessarily rich, but he is not lacking in money, which does not mean he's poor. It just does not mean he's wealthy, but it just means he's not lacking money. He doesn't pursue wealth as much as others, right? He could be poor, but he could be considered poor in wealth. But yeah, the little prince pulling up the baobab tree is this spiritual apparition, this imaginary figure, um, also his conscience, right? It is his naive inner child pushing him to be a better person. And another contrasting figure, the devil on his shoulder, right? If the little prince is this angel on his shoulder, the devil on his shoulder is Sartre. I haven't seen a picture of Sartre, but looking at him, he looks a lot like Marx, Groucho Marx, very comedic figure, or Charlie Chaplin. So, a middle-aged, older Mikhail Tal or Lemony Snicket, the actor for Lemony Snicket, I think was Jim Carrey, with the strong sideburns, the crazed scientist, mad scientist, artist sort of stereotype. Sartre is known to be this sort of smoking literary figure. His depressed, emotionally repressed desire, his ego, right, and pushing him to indulge in emotional relationships and pleasure, maybe a little bit of the more stereotypical idea and popular idea of hedonism. Hedonism actually is much more about temperance and spiritual fulfillment, similar to Buddhism, but we won't get into that. But yeah, so it would be considered a mind palace of sorts, a reoccurring inner conscience, this conflict between Sartre and the Little Prince. Now, trying to depict the Little Prince, I had a couple of ideas, which is really fun, right? I could have depicted the inner prince as his classical illustrations, wearing the green clothing of 1970s French science fiction. As I said before, Bobbly Broccoli had a nice video on that, or of some French scientists. But yeah, very traditional attire of the time, science fiction drawing of the time, very simplistic child drawings. There's even like what the 2004, 2008 movie, The Little Prince. But then while I was generating images through Stable Diffusion AI, AI art or generated art, it came up with an interesting result, similar to other genres in anime, especially a specific anime called Fate, Fate Grand Order or Fate Stay Night. We see a lot of characters gender swap, right? So from a male Arthur to a female Arthuria. It would be very interesting to see a female The Little Prince, is it not? So it would be funny to see this floating apparition of a prize figure of The Little Prince as a female, right? So I thought that would be interesting, a PVC model figure, a prize figure. Unfortunately, that was a lot of work, but I did indulge in some of the creative uses and, tried to generate some VR chat 3D realistic models. So or the classical chibi figure, right? I think there's a fun webtoon like Leonardo da Vinci as a chibi figure. So I went that route rather than a full-on, child. So it's just an interesting, Japanese anime style chibi figure. So that would be kind of the direction in which I'd pull into. But yeah, then you have Sartre, this apparition, this ghostly figure, and whatnot. And these are this inner conflict, right? So our main character, the little prince pulling up the baobab tree, becomes a very popular script writer. He's very good at writing romance and indulging in that power dynamic relationship between streamer and viewer, or in this case, a writer and a customer. It becomes so popular, in fact, that it is a little bit of he starts a little bit of a trend. It becomes viral. His writing is posted in the Literary World magazine, and while not accepted culturally in traditional circles, he is well known in a trendy sphere, right? The short media form content. So similar to how the author of the Red Mansions, which was considered more popularist at the time, very lowbrow entertainment, as was Webnovels and YY 小说, right? Digital literature, digital masturbation. These not necessarily culturally significant works, similar to how Titanic was barely won an Oscar because of its box office implications rather than its artistic pursuits and awards by maybe a more snobby or stuffy community of critics and artists. The Little Prince is looked down upon. So he has this hidden identity on one side and his traditional writing career on the other. And his writing career starts to gain some interesting um, attraction as various forces come together to collude on his behalf. His writing is appreciated by some of his superiors, whether through his relationships of drinking, because as even as a civil official, he still has to engage in it, even if he doesn't enjoy doing so. He eventually finds like-minded people who maybe not necessarily strong in power or strong literary, but just people who live in the cracks, right? Who have a strong appreciation that slowly start to support him. His childhood friends. He finds a like-minded colleague that he first insults and then befriends, as they are like-minded in that sense. He is not super powerful, both politically or writing, but he's just the right mix, and that just gets his foot in the door of the literary world. So the first couple chapters discusses this conflict, this office conflict um, and literary award of Xinghe magazine, right? This local county or regional magazine. Now, the reason why he's been passed for promotions, he has no awards, although he comes from a distinguished university, right? His younger colleague, um, Diao Diao Yiwen, has previously won awards or his writing is recognized, whereas our main character's manuscripts were rejected and he's never really popularized them or shared them out. So, being a marginalized figure, he kind of has to fight this way through bureaucracy, and he's kind of this angry youth, right? His inner Sartre and Little Prince come together, right? Sartre, the realistic, jaded figure, and then the Little Prince, his encouragement and politeness converge to create this angry thunderstorm or force of this passionate, hot-blooded writer, right? This crazed, mad genius, writing genius that just works really hard and kind of brute forces his way through things through emotional satisfaction of writing, right? So his first work, Creeper World, um, competes both behind the scenes and on the stage for writing, right? There's a lot of circles and hurdles he has to get through, whether his past relationships with his not necessarily ex-lover, but a person he previously dated. It's just a very interesting, complex relationship that only becomes deeper as the story goes on. It doesn't reveal everything, but enough to make it a very interesting drama. His various patrons that support him in his writing endeavors, as well as his sense of self-confidence as success starts to come in, both as his writing is recognized and rejected, right? These various forces trying to shape his character. He is very self-loathing and has low sense of self-confidence due to all these rejections because he doesn't take the normal path that a normal person would take. He doesn't indulge in flattery and promoting himself. He tries to look inward and try to improve himself rather than to market himself, which is very interesting. And so his writing has this unique angry style to it. He's very naive in the ways of the world, as said before, very introverted. And so our main character through this first battle starts to gain connections, both in the literary world and in the popular world as the Little Prince.